Hello, and welcome to Weird Music. You know the drill by now. This is the show where we look at weird, unconventional albums that are unconventional for whatever reason. We look at a whole bunch of different stuff, and today's going to be no different, of course, except for the fact that today's episode is the first request we've had on the show. This was requested in a comment on episode 2 by a good friend of mine, and considering how much I love this band, there was no way I could not do a video on this. Sorry it's taken so long for this to come out, but we got there. So, moving on. This is a band that I've been following for a very, very long time. Ever since I discovered the record label Constellation Records, discovered Godspeed You Black Emperor, Silver Mount Zion, Do Make Say Think, I also discovered this band. And I've got to say, I was super, super pleased when they made a comeback in 2019. Because now that they're back, they're producing some even more confusing, crazy sounding albums. It's amazing stuff. So today, we're looking at that comeback album, the 2019 release of C'est Ça by Fly Pan Am. Let's get started. Who are Fly Pan Am? Well, Fly Pan Am are an experimental post-rock group formed in the late 90s in Montreal, Canada, with members Jean-Sébastien Trucci, Roger Tellier-Craig, Jonathan Parent, and Felix Morel, and sometimes Eric Gringaz. I couldn't see his name in the notes for this one, but he was definitely on the last album, back in 2004, I think. Moving on though. With all these members, they push out some incredibly experimental releases that completely deconstruct conventional norms and genres, and then they repackage them into something really unique and mind-blowing stuff. Their music's frenetic, it's motoric, it's confusing, and weirdly very, very enjoyable when it all just clicks into place for you, of course. I know I say that a lot, but so much music is like that, especially weird music. And the weird thing is, though, with Fly Pan Am music is that there is such an incredible emphasis on self-sabotage in many of their works. You see them using their musical talents to produce amazing sounding music before they just destroy the whole thing and you're left with these weird electronic squeaking and squalling stuff it's parts of the song, but it's completely it's so peculiar. It's driving along and then crashing at the end of the road and stuff. Very peculiar, very peculiar. And whilst their earlier works sort of saw the band really delving into elements of sprawling post-rock, they really pulled that genre apart and produced some of the most experimental albums you could ever hear, the early self-titled album and moving on. Very weird stuff. Their later work, though, it kind of sees them delving more into what you could argue is conventional song structure, but still it's presented in that weird experimental style that only Fly Pan Am can produce. It's weird. You listen to it, it's not conventional by any means, but for Fly Pan Am, this is probably the most conventional album they've produced, and that's not a bad thing, though. The fact that they take genres and destroy them and rebuild them and stuff. It's phenomenal stuff. It's phenomenal. So, C'est Ça, so what? After the release of their 2004 record N'écoutez pas, Fly Pan Am, they called it a day. Their final album, N'écoutez pas, it was a wonderful culmination of everything they'd built up from their debut self-titled release. It took post-rock to this weird sort of krautrock world where anything could happen by that point. And during that hiatus, it was about 15 years of no Fly Pan Am. But during that time, we saw all the band members engaging in numerous projects, from the various bands that built upon that Fly Pan Am experimentalism to full dirges into sound art exploration. And we mentioned Christophe Mignon in the last episode. You will see a number of solo releases from members of Fly Pan Am on Christophe Mignon's label Squidbucket Press as well. You might look at a few of them, I've got a couple of them in my collection. And yeah, these guys, they're responsible for some of the most unusual and peculiar albums I have ever heard in my life. And you know, looking at it now, I think if anything can be attributed to my my interest in weird music, if anything could be the launching pad, I guess, for setting me off on this journey of discovering weird stuff, I'd have to say it's probably Fly Pan Am, right? Like, their music's weird in the first place, and then checking out all their solo releases, all the other bands they've done, collaboratives, so all that stuff, they've got, like, it stretches out so far and beyond just Fly Pan Am. It's amazing stuff. And so anyway, 15 years after the release of N'Écoutez Pas, we saw the band return with this album here, C'est Ça. And literally, it just sees the band launching off from exactly where they left off, further developing their sound of self-sabotage and rock, krautrock and music concrete and stuff, and developing it into something truly wonderful and impressive. And thinking about it, there's this weird consistency to Fly Pan Am's albums. They're so confusing and baffling and stuff, but you listen to the entire discography, you can hear these little musical motifs that get carried along from album to album, and it links it all together into this massive cohesive experience. It's what makes that comeback all so more sweet though. We're getting quintessential Fly Pan Am experience here. It's reminiscent of their early works, yet it still manages to sound completely new, incorporate new ideas, new concepts, and just sound like nothing Fly Pan Am has ever released before. And yet there's still something nostalgic, and it sounds just like stuff they really like. I don't get it. It's so weird to talk about, but they do it so perfectly. They do their thing amazingly well. So let's get into the grit of it then. C'est Ça starts off with a squelchy sprawl of electronics that load up this entire album experience for us in this confusing, noisy mess. It's so baffling and confusing and squelchy, and yet it's the perfect track to start off this album, basically, for us to get reintroduced to Fly Pan Am. And it's from there, though, that the band start going off into these weird places. The songs, instead of going into post-rock, though, it launches off into dreamy shoegaze kind of stuff. And it sounds like nothing we've heard from them before. It's ethereal, it's wonderful, and you can hear them channeling influences like My Bloody Valentine and Husker Du. It's a very large-sounding thing. It's very loud and big, and you can, very rhythmic and motoric and stuff. It's so good. And yeah, they're just finding new ways to surprise us, and as it progresses, we find ourselves, in very peculiar and strange worlds where the instruments just seem to explode in manic freakouts. And you can hear the elements of shoegaze in there, experimentalism, music concrete. There's even black metal in there as well. Throughout this record, you'll hear instances of screaming from one of the members. And yet, even though it's screaming, it's perfectly mixed into the balance of the tracks. It gives it a really ferocious energy that's reminiscent of that previous album, N'Écoutez Pas. And so with all that build-up though, these shoegazy, rhythmic, motoric, and then sprawly electronic weird interludes and stuff, it all culminates into the album's second half, where you see all those elements and stuff being further developed into big, long, sprawling compositions. I'd say it's very prevalent on One Hit Wonder, where the black metal screaming style, it takes the forefront of the track, partnered with very squelchy electronics for the most part. And yeah, it's after that though we get to what is my favourite track on this thing, Discrete Channeling. This is a wonderful track. It takes that motoric rhythm section from Trucci and Moral, propels the track into this really weird, dreamy, wonderful world where the vocal style is so peculiar and creepy, just kind of buried under the mix of it there. And then it completely shatters the whole thing into this cosmic shoegaze blowout. It's the end of that track is so just up there. It's so good. easily one of my favourite things the band has ever composed. Like, that's such a good track. And yet, the album's not even over by that point. You still have the finale track, Interface of Shattered Dreams. And you've got, like, that one starts off with these soft blast beats that underscore similar elements to what we've heard on the album already, like Distance Dealer. That shoegaze style and stuff. It's a further deconstruction, reconstruction of these previously established concepts. Sabotaging their music further. Everything fades into a sprawly, noisy crawl before you get one final reprise of everything. It's such a trip the whole way through this album. Like, I love how they establish concepts, they establish ideas, they deconstruct them, then they reconstruct them in later tracks and stuff. It just builds and destroys, building and destroying, and it's so cool how consistent that whole thing is though. Like, they do such a good job of keeping the whole thing together and making it sound like something like it's hard to say, but it's just so consistent, like how they do things. So yeah, like we should, like, I do want to go into it again though. Like, the common element in Fly Panam's music is, like, they've described it on this album as sonically vandalizing their music. They take experimental concepts and then they completely deconstruct it. You see them deconstructing conventional notions of regular genres like rock, shoegaze, etc., what we've already discussed, repackaging it in their own way, and it gives everything this really weird quality. Like, the music on this album, it sounds familiar to their old works, and yet it sounds completely new, unlike anything we've heard from them before. And I find that to be phenomenal. Like, each listen of this album, like, the more you listen to it, the more you're going to discover from it, the more you'll hear new things you didn't hear before, like hit little bits, like particular musical motifs, could have been from previous albums. It's so weird, because it all feels familiar, like we've been there before, and yet you're constantly kept on your toes by this thing. Especially as the band just push out idea after idea after idea. Like, there's nothing else like it, and man, I have to say, it's one of the most concise statements they've made so far. Like, the early works I absolutely adore, but they're so sprawling and experimental. It's like it's all just, just wandering off into its own dimension, whereas this feels like they're taking all of their sabotaging elements and actual musical elements and then packaging it into something much more concise and cohesive. It's a phenomenal record. And yeah, I think with that, it's the end of today's episode of Weird Music. I would like to thank my friend Rory for suggesting this one. I'm sorry it took so long for this one to come out, but we got there in the end. If you right there, have any suggestions for future videos, then please suggest them in the comments if you would like to. I'll do my best to get around to it. Maybe, I don't know, perhaps. I also hope that you go check out Fly Panam. The band have released a follow-up to this, Frontera, in 2021. And the wonderful thing about that album was it saw them partnering with Animals of Distinction to create this wonderful contemporary dance piece that partners abstract dancing with Fly Panam's abstract music. Like, it takes, phenomenal performance piece with phenomenal music. Like, what a mix of stuff. Like, go check that out as well if you get a chance. But for now, I wish you all the best. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Wish you all the best, take care, and bye-bye for now. Bye-bye.